and tone for a cold beer.
Hey, Carlos here with Buckaroo Gear. I am with Christian. Christian, you want to introduce yourself?
Christian Winder.
And Bridger. And Bridger is building a pair of chinks for himself, and then Christian's trying to learn how to build chinks too. We're in his beautiful shop here in Chugwater, Wyoming. Or is it Cheyenne, Wyoming?
Chugwater. Close enough.
Close enough. And he just got a Class 26 sewing machine from a leather machine company. And I thought this would be a great opportunity just to go over some sewing machine basics. Kind of show him what I know and kind of some techniques that I follow, and I don't know, just kind of have a visit about sewing machine and kind of how to use it. Some of the questions that he had earlier, I thought maybe we'd just try to answer them on video so we can share with everybody. So I guess one of the very first things and one of the most basic things is on the bobbin. And when you're getting ready to wind a bobbin, and most people that have been around sewing machines kind of know this already, but some of the rookie mistakes I've seen lately are you don't have the thread. This is a tensioner for the bobbin winder, and if a person doesn't get the thread sandwiched in between these two tension plates and just kind of runs it around there, you can make this mistake of just kind of running it around there without pulling it tight through those tension plates. You're not going to get the tension that you need on the bobbin, and it's going to end up being a rat's nest underneath the material that you sew. So anytime you change thread on this tension plate for the bobbin winder, you want to make sure you pull that thread tight and get it sandwiched in between that tension, or between these tension plates. Did you see that? Mm-hmm. So that's like one of the main things there. And then when it comes to winding a bobbin, a lot of times people will run this thread through the side here and then start winding the bobbin, which is kind of an easy way to do it. I've got an older machine that doesn't have these holes in the side of the bobbin spool. So what I do is I just tie a double overhand knot in it, and I'll start winding it myself. Give it a couple of wraps, and then hit that, and then go to sewing on my project, and it'll wind while I'm sewing. The only thing you want to do when you do it this way is you want to cut this tail off before you start letting it wind. Now you're good to go, and you can wind your bobbin. The main thing I wanted to emphasize is to make sure that you have the thread in there between the tension plates. So we just switched from size, was it 207 to size 138 thread. So now we're going to check out our tension settings and see how the tension is set on the machine. So this is just probably a 4, maybe even a 3.5 ounce shaft leather. So we're going to go ahead and we'll start here, and whenever I start stitching, before I lower my presser foot, I take the bottom thread, make sure it's pulled out to the back side of the needle, and then I take my top thread and make sure it's underneath this presser foot before I lower my presser foot, so that when I start my first stitch, when that needle begins its stroke upward, it doesn't pull that top thread back through and make a funny stitch. So I always make sure that the presser foot is on holding tension on top of that top thread. Then we'll go and we'll start sewing, and we'll see what the tension looks like on this leather here. One thing you'll also notice is before I make my turn and lift that presser foot, I make sure that the needle is as far down in its stroke before I turn. I guess as far down in the stroke as you can get it before you turn. So I just have a muscle memory. I have a automatic to where I'll just pull that thing down as far as it'll go before I lift that presser foot and turn, or I'll do it by by eye with the motor. But that's good enough for like a test piece. So we'll go ahead and we'll see where our tension settings are. The other thing that somebody that's an absolute beginner that they might not know is when they go to lift their presser foot up and they go to try to pull their material out, it's going to be hard to pull the material out if the shuttle hook on the bobbin hasn't released the thread yet. So right now I can't pull it. Some people will force it and they'll end up breaking a needle or breaking the thread. Right now I can't pull it because the shuttle hook on the bobbin has still got this thread and it's still trying to make its connection. So all you got to do is rotate it while you're holding tension on the material. Rotate your flywheel by hand until it releases. See? And then it'll release. You can pull it out. You can go ahead and cut your material or your string, your thread, and you can check your tension. So right now it looks like it's in pretty good order. The only thing I might change is I might make this stitch just a little bit smaller so it looks a little bit cleaner, but I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll just go ahead and we'll change thread or stitch length a little bit, and then we'll do a test on some different thicknesses of material.
So I just want to say that's a pretty cool trick of having the thread underneath the presser foot. Because I've been always trying to pull on both threads, to keep tension on those threads as it's starting.
Right.
But it's way easier if you just let it hold the tension on that thread, and then you don't have to screw around with it. So.
Yep. Yeah, it makes a big difference. Yeah, and you only have two hands. And
Right.
you're already trying to do pat your head, rub your belly, and do all this stuff at the same time because you got your feet in play, and so let's see, I think it's that way. That's as short as it'll go. I think that's pretty good. So again, that bottom thread is caught by the shuttle hook, so I'll just rotate it until it releases, and then we can cut our material. Well, it looks pretty good to me. So what I'm looking for here is I want to make sure that there's no exposed loops. And the way you could really tell is if you had two different color threads, say you had a white on the bottom and a black on the top, you could really tell if there was an exposed loop, because in the center of the material is where the thread should be crossing over, making your stitch. And sometimes if your tensions are off, it will have, and you can kind of see here at the end, it will kind of do this. So really what you want is that loop into the center of the material, buried in the center of the material to where you can't see it. And that's where you know you have your tension set right. So we'll go to a thicker shaft leather. This is a full 4.5 ounce shaft leather. Well, I've never sewn on this machine before. This is my first time sewing on a Class 26 machine. But they're all pretty much, all these basics that I'm talking about are pretty much universal no matter what machine you're on.
Not too bad.
That's pretty good. So this will be the acid test. And this is where we might see that we need to make some adjustments on tension. So this is probably what, 8-9 ounce?
Yeah, probably.
8-9 ounce veg tan. This is probably Herman oak. and we're going to sew it to some shap leather. This is 4.5 ounce shap leather. And this is a real common thing. You're always, a lot of times in shap making or other tack goods, you're going to be lining with a softer leather or a latigo leather. So it's going to be the same principle here. The only thing is now is you're confined to a stitching groove on your veg tan. And what's really cool about this machine is it's got a split in this presser toe, so you can line up this split with your stitching groove, and you can see it really easily. The one thing I probably will add is that when you're sewing, you want to make sure you're comfortable, because you're going to be spending a lot of time at a sewing machine if you're making a lot of stuff. So you want to make sure you can see really well. This right here is like an edge guide for sewing a straight line. When you get to where you're sewing quite a bit, you won't need this. If this blocks your vision of the needle at all, you can just remove it and get it out of your way so you can see what you're doing. This is a really good cheat code for if you don't have a stitching groove. So you can just, if you're doing a lot of strap work and you're not running a stitching groove, you can just go right on at 100 miles an hour and stay straight.
So do you like to start your needle by hand with the hand wheel first?
Yep.
To get it where you want it, and then start with the foot.
Yep. And then always make sure that my thread's underneath that presser foot on that side. Yeah. It's just habit, and it's just, I do a lot of things I don't even know I'm doing just because I've been doing it for so long. Yeah. But so this, you might not go as fast as I do. I'm going fast because I've done this for so long. But the beauty of these machines with the servo motor is you can go pretty much snail slow and stay in that groove. And I will add that if you're turning, you want to turn, make little adjustments while the needle's down and into the material. So when I get up to this corner, I'm gonna see where my needle's at, and I might hand wheel it from here because I don't know the motor very well. And I'll make sure that needle is down at the very bottom of its stroke before I lift my presser foot and turn by hand.
So what tips and tricks do you have for if you're running along like this and you get to a pivot point right there and the needle doesn't because of the length of the stitch, doesn't line up with that, but you've already got a stitch groove in there, and it's obviously going to show if you're not in your stitch groove.
So at that point, you have to make a decision on whether or not you want to split the difference and move it over by hand so you get into that corner, or you shorten it up a little bit. Okay. And you end up having 2 stitches before you get to the corner. Yeah. So you'll either end up with a long stitch or two short stitches. So I can already tell you though, now the tension's not right. You can see that bottom loop is coming through.
Yeah.
And remember I told you this before. So when you're sewing on a veg tan with a shap leather liner, your tension's going to end up being too tight on your top thread because there's not as much friction on this veg tan leather as there is on a double or triple thick shap leather. So what I would do with this machine if I were you is I would take a paint pen or a paint marker of some kind, and this is your main tensioner right here, and I would set it up to where you know how many turns in or out you need to make adjustment on that top thread tension. Okay. So if I just did this on the fly and just said I'm going to go a half out, we'll just go a half and we'll see what that does.
So there you're creating less tension.
Less tension.
Thread.
So when that needle comes up and runs this take up on the needle, it hopefully doesn't take that loop and pull it up toward the top of the material as much.
So it's less tension on this thread. So when it's on this guy, where that
which is your take up bar, yeah,
it's got less force on it. I got you.
That's right. Yeah. Probably ran out of the groove there a little bit.
Well, maybe show them how you would shorten or lengthen that corner.
So right here, I could do this by hand and say, now I'm not going to catch that very corner. So what I'll do is lift up the pressure foot and move it over, make a little adjustment and make sure I land in that corner. Then I'll go all the way down, turn. Yeah, see, I got out of the groove.
So having just a fuzz longer stitch right there is going to be less noticeable
Right.
than not hitting the corner.
Not hitting the
Your
corner.
eye's going to pick up on the corner.
Your eye's going to pick up on it, like you said, and then say, for instance, you antique this before you grooved it. If you don't fill that well up with stitch, it's going to stand out even more. But in a lot of cases, only the craftsman notices stuff like that. So. So again here, I'll lift up and just make sure my needle lands. And this is where you really got to be able to see without shadows. Just make sure your needle lands in that corner. I'll let the presser foot down, lift it back up and turn. And now we'll hit this straightaway at a little bit of speed and make sure our tension's set a little better. Well, let's just pull it out and we'll see what it looks like. Still a little tight up top. So we went a half turn out up top. Now we'll go a full turn. It's hard to see with that black thread. It's a lot better though. You can kind of tell. See, this is where a half turn was.
Yeah.
This is a full turn. Which is about normal. I mean, full turn out, so that's one full turn.
Yeah. So on thicker leather, we want to decrease the tension on the thread.
It's not necessarily thicker leather. It's leather with less friction. So this is a firmer veg tan leather. If you think about it, when you're punching a hole through it with a needle, it's going to stay open because it's a firmer leather. It's kind of like drilling a piece of wood, like a pilot hole in a piece of wood, versus just running a screw in without doing a pilot hole. You've got to imagine this is sort of more of a pilot hole because this leather has more body and will stay open, versus the shap leather, when you run a needle through it, especially if you're doing 2 or 3 layers, it's going to want to close back up around that thread and create friction, and that's where you need more take-ups or more tension on that top thread. That's the way I think of it. Why don't you?
I think that's valuable information.
So the manual for my sewing machine shows you a picture where if the knot's on the top, you loosen the tension. If the knot's on the bottom, you tighten it. And so writing something down like that might help you, because then you would look at, whether you're seeing the knot on this side or this side. And so that's how I determine which way. So if the knot's on the top, I turn it to the left. If I see the knot on the bottom, I turn it to the right.
The other thing I'll probably add is, I've always done this. No, we're not on. I'm just going to do it blind over here. If I come around a corner, what a lot of guys will do is they'll overstitch. When you go to, say you're at the end of your project and you close your loop on sewing.
That's all right, because I was going to ask you anyway how you terminate
That's okay.
your sewing project, whether you reverse stitch over the top of it, or whether you like to go forward.
I'm going to start here. We'll just say this is a shaft top or something. I don't know if this is the right way to do it, but this is how I always do it. You come around this perimeter of your piece, and you're going to end up back over here. What I always do is take and pull this bottom thread and pull that top thread back through. And then I'll finish up my piece. And like I was saying earlier, if you don't know your machine enough to trust that it's going to fall in the right length stitch to catch that last hole, you're going to have to manually put it there. And you can kind of feel it with this hand, you can feel it with this hand that you're catching the hole. And then I'll overstitch. See there, I can feel that it's catching the right hole. I'll overstitch 2 stitches. And I'll say it's terminated, I'll say it's done. I'm going to cut my thread. I'm going to go back here. And what some guys will do is just burn this top thread, burn these threads, and they're done. What I like to do, and this is something I've always done, nobody taught me to do this, I didn't see anybody do it, I just thought this is the way you should do it. I'll pull that top thread back through, so everything's clean here. And you can really tell with smaller thread and smaller stitch length that it's clean. The black is a little bit hard to kind of see, and I'll just tie a double overhand knot in that. And then I'll burn my strings. Everything's really clean up top.
Clean on top,
Yeah.
So you don't worry about using the reverse handle to try and go back and do a reverse stitch.
So there are certain instances on certain projects where you are not going to be sewing the perimeter. You're just going to be sewing one line. When you're sewing one line, use that. So if, say you're starting up here and you're ending down here. You're going to start here, you're going to back stitch it 2 stitches, and come back down, get all the way to the end of your project, back stitch 2 stitches, and then come forward again.
Yeah, and then you can still pull your strings.
You can still pull your strings, but it's not entirely necessary because in that instance, you've only got 2 strings coming out.
Okay. Instead of 4 strings.
Right. Right. So you could just burn your strings at the surface. And what I use is like a little string burner. It looks like a miniature, it's actually a battery powered soldering iron.
Okay.
Or you can just clip them off and then hit them with a light, or some people do that too. Whatever's easier for you.
Yeah.
So,
They make little thread burners that are. I have a re-plug-in one, and I've found that when I do the back stitches, sometimes I just really can't pull the thread through, and I feel like I'm going to make more of a mess. So then I'll just burn them there.
so one more thing, and then Christian's going to show us how to sew. Show us how to sew. Say that 5 times fast. Before you start, because this presser foot has a split toe, has this little opening in it, mine doesn't have that. So mine, imagine this is closed up and my thread is always through that hole. With this one, because when you pull your material out, the thread comes out. Before you start sewing, you want to make sure that that top thread goes through that split toe. And again, get in the habit of putting it underneath that presser foot and then just dropping it. And then you can go to sewing. If you're really concerned about starting in the corner, you just go ahead and manually start yourself in the corner by hand and then go on from there. It doesn't really matter where you start, in my opinion.
So now would be when you'd want to pull that back down, right? No.
That's pretty good. I bet you if we went through 3, triple thickness, it would change it up a little bit, but it looks pretty good. Doesn't look like it needs adjustment.
No.
If anything, if it were out of adjustment on this, you'd see the loops on the bottom.
Okay.
And you have to tighten up the top again. But that's where your leeway is.
So loops on the bottom, tighten the tensions, loops on the top, loosen the tension.
That's right.
That's been the easiest way
Yeah.
for me to
Yeah.
figure it out.
I need a cheat sheet that's right here.
There's one coming out right there.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's pretty good. The other thing you can do is feel the thread on the surface of the leather. If you flip it over on this side, you can feel that it's tucked in more, it's tighter versus on this side. So you could afford to tighten it up a little bit if you wanted, but if you didn't want to mess with it and leave well enough alone, you could leave it the way it is. The other thing you could do, and this is something you're always going to have to check,
Right.
no matter what. Threads, different types of threads, different manufacturers of threads, they're going to have different tension settings. They're going to be a little fickle. The other thing you want to check and you want to listen and you want to feel is this needle. When you start hearing that needle go through the material, it's time to change it. Because these needles, they go through, believe it or not, well, you would believe it because you have a mechanic background. These needles go through heat cycles because they develop a whole bunch of heat
Yeah.
Going
Piercing through there.
and you're gonna end up dulling the edge on that point. And the other thing is if you have trouble, if you end up jumping off the side of the material and you bend the needle and it hits the shuttle hook, whatever, change it. But you can hear it.
Yeah.
If you're in here and it's quiet,
Just
and
like you're
sewing
hearing
it,
your knife.
Yep.
And you start to hear that knife.
If you start hearing that needle piercing through the material and it gets pretty loud, change it out.
So is this something that when you're sewing a pair of shafts and you're going through the belt top versus, the leg band,
Right.
are you constantly, obviously you're going to always be evaluating it, but do you have to adjust your sewing machine back and forth all the time?
Sometimes, yeah.
So you're just constantly don't just
Checking
be
it out.
sewing blind.
Yeah, don't just sew blind, sew like 4 or 5 inches and just, as it's in the machine, just look at it. And if you see that something's not right, make your adjustments right then on the fly. And that's where you'll get good with this. You'll get familiar with that and you'll do it. A lot of times it's pretty well set, but there's always that, there's always a gotcha. And until when you're new at it, you're trying all kinds of new things, you're trying new material, you're trying new techniques.
Different thread.
Different threads. It's going to be a constant. It's going to be a
Different thicknesses of thread.
yeah. It's going to be a constant adjustment.
So what I did when I made my totes was I actually took little samples of the hides I was sewing and ran the thinner part through and looked at it and ran a little piece of the what I knew was going to be thicker, and I just looked at it. And that was my way of just testing it before I sewed on the whole bag.
Do you find that you have to adjust this tension knob?
See, I don't have that one on mine. I only have the one big one here.
And I only adjust that one.
And there's, you can add more tension into it by running through this post even more. So there's almost infinite adjustability on tension. But once you kind of get baseline where you're at,
They showed in the book to go through a couple of these holes, and I don't know, we could try it now with this smaller thread. If I was having the 207 in there,
yeah,
even with the presser foot up,
yeah,
I could just barely pull that thread out,
yeah.
So then I took one off, just went straight through, and then I probably backed some of that up too, and then it made it to where I could at least, because you'd get done and you could just barely, you like bowing this needle, and
Yeah,
I bet I got too much there.
yeah. That's when you got too much. And then about all these holes that are marked red. You got little droplets of oil every once in a while. I'm sure they have a recommendation on how often they do it. And then, does this have a reservoir in it?
Yeah,
pump on the bottom. Yeah. So you always want to make sure you check that. I was pretty bad about that. I let mine get pretty low, and I realized that there was a reservoir that I needed to refill in the bottom. Because a lot of these machines, they're self-lubricating and they have pumps in them. And they'll have a reservoir, either a set reservoir with a sight glass, or the whole bottom pan, like on yours, is filled with oil.
Well, the other thing this has is it's got this string,
Yeah, the wicking.
wicking string
Yeah.
that goes all the way through. And when I first saw it, I was unboxing the whole thing.
You're thinking,
I
oh,
was tempted to
start
get the
cutting
scissors
off.
out and start cutting all that out because I'm like,
The
how did they
manual
just-
for ours said, "Don't cut that."
Well, it knows it says there too, but I'm thinking for shipping, you know, like, oh, they must have tied all this together so it won't come
yeah.
apart. And I just about was like, I bet I need to take that out. And I'm like, that's all oily. Maybe that's supposed to be there.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Keep the price going
Yeah.
That was good thinking, Bridger. That's what it's for.
Stock up, set a tone for a cold beer and a bottle